Guys, welcome to the channel. Welcome to another video. Yes, today's video is another tier list we've got in store for you. We're going to be ranking each and every single Premier League team in terms of how well, how mediocrely, or how poorly they have started their Premier League campaign for the 2023-24 campaign. We're going to be using the A, B, C, D, E, and F ranking for each and every single Premier League team. I know Leicester is down there. I don't know why Leicester's down there. Ignore Leicester. They're in the Championship. I don't know why they're there, but the other 20 teams are there, and we're going to obviously, like I say, be ranking them from A, B, C, D, E, and F as in regards to my opinion on how well, how mediocrely, or how poorly they have started their new campaigns. Before I go any further into discussing all of that, though, because like I say, it is the international break, so of course, times like these are dry for very, very dry for football content and things like that, particularly if you're mainly club guy. And of course, we're subject to Southgate warfare next week, so we need something to get us through it. So this is why I'm doing this. Before we get into all of that, though, I would like to remind you all to please like the video and also subscribe if you're new. Both things always are very greatly appreciated. Get involved in the comment section as well. Tell me what you think about the start of the Premier League season, each and every single teams. And of course, tell me about your thoughts, comments, opinions, predictions, feelings, whatever you want to call it, on this video, on the Premier League teams as a whole, their starts to the seasons, whether you agree, whether you disagree with my predictions or my gradings of all the teams or whatever the case may be. Sure, it'll make for great and interesting reading down below, so do get involved down there. Without further ado, let's get into it. And first up, we've got Manchester City, who move into the A tier because they are vastly achieving what they were expected to achieve this season. Of course, coming back off the treble-winning season last campaign and also the three-peat, City are on course for another title challenge this campaign where they're looking to make it 4 Premier League title wins on the bounce. They are currently sat top of the table, top of the tree. They are currently 1 point clear of second and third place in Liverpool and Arsenal. They are obviously doing very well right now, and you know, there are a few kinks to their armour. I think there are still a few question marks over City in terms of their vulnerability. I think we've seen it a couple of times this season, particularly when Rodri's not there. And of course, over the weekend when Chelsea had a real go at this City side. I still think there are a few questions to be answered of Pep Guardiola's new side. Of course, he is trying to transform the side and change it constantly. Does Julian Alvarez and Haaland, do they work together as a long-term solution? Is that midfield that is relatively new working together? Is the likes of Mateus Nunes, Mateo Kovacic, are they bedding in well as Gvardiol in the defensive area? Are they missing Kevin De Bruyne, who's been missing for a long-term absence with injury, as well as the likes of John Stones as well? There are a few questions there that I think need to be answered, but for the most part, City are City. They're taking everything in their stride, as you would expect from this City side and from Pep Guardiola. They are currently sat top of the table, as you probably would expect them, and of course, them being top of the table, again, are we surprised? Absolutely not. They are achieving what they wanted to achieve, which is why they are moving into the A tier. Speaking of another team that's moving into the A tier, we've got Liverpool. And I'm not just saying this because I'm a Liverpool fan. I'm not just saying this because I'm biased. But I fully expected Liverpool to not be doing as well as what they are doing right now. I thought going into the season, we were very much unprepared. I thought very much we were a bit lackluster in key areas. I thought the DM position in particular was going to come back and bite us. And yes, it still could come back to bite us in the long term. But for right now, it's looking pretty good. Like I say, apart from 1 or 2 hiccups here and there, Liverpool are looking pretty solid. They're scoring goals. Their attack is a real threat. Darwin Núñez is very much improved. Mohamed Salah is inevitable. He's Mohamed Salah. Virgil van Dijk's getting back to his best. Alisson Becker is still the best goalkeeper in the world. I have very few complaints with Liverpool right now. I know that I made a video last week saying, are we starting to stutter? Because I do have a few concerns going forward, particularly the DM position, particularly the defence, particularly our away form right now. But for right now, if I'm looking at it objectively and as a whole across the whole entire season, only suffering 1 defeat in our 12 games so far, and that came in obviously very controversial circumstances at the hands of Tottenham Hotspur, of course, in that infamous game there. I have very little complaints. I think Jurgen Klopp deserves a huge amount of credit for what he's done with this Liverpool side and rebuilding it, redesigning it and resurrecting it. And of course for what he's done particularly with that midfield and bringing in the likes of Ryan Gravenberch, Alexis McAllister and of course Dominic Szoboszlai. I think he's done brilliant. I think the new players have done brilliant. I think the resurrection of this team is a very good work in progress that has started off very well, hit the ground running, but can only get better from here. I think they've overachieved in my opinion. I think they've somewhat gone under the radar, which can affect teams in a positive way, and I think it has done with Liverpool a little bit. There's not as much pressure on them, especially with having the Europa League to contend with as well, so they can play, rotate, and also bed in some of their newer signings quicker, in my opinion, or maybe even some of their youngsters. I think it's really benefited Liverpool this season in all aspects with all the changes that have obviously occurred with Liverpool so far this campaign. A tier for the Reds. Arsenal, now you can move them into the A tier if you want. I'm going to drop them into B tier. I'm going to be slightly harsher on Arsenal. I am fully open to changing that, and I'm fully open to the argument that Arsenal deserve to be in the A tier. However, in my personal opinion, there are still a few question marks over Arsenal in terms of whether last season was legitimate, a title challenge, or whether it was just a bit of a flash in the pan. I think Arsenal are brilliant, by the way. I think they are absolutely incredible. I like what Mikel Arteta's done. My issue with Arsenal is whilst their defence has tightened up and has been brilliant this season, their attack still has a few question marks. Their side still has a few question marks. Their midfield, and I know they suffered with a few injuries this season, but their midfield, again, leaves me with some questions. Do they have that proper depth in that midfield? Is the attack good enough? In my opinion, not necessarily. I like Gabriel Jesus and I think he fits in well with this side, but does he score enough goals for the Gunners? Does Eddie Nketiah warrant starting week in, week out? In my opinion, he's not good enough. There are still a few question marks. I think William Saliba is playing out of his skin right now. I think Bukayo Saka is incredible. I think Gabriel Martinelli's brilliant. There are a couple of other players in there as well that are really good and I really like from Arsenal's point of view. Zinchenko seems to be getting back to his best. Declan Rice is absolutely phenomenal. But there are still some question marks that I have to consider Arsenal for so far this campaign. The likes of Kai Havertz, the likes of Jorginho. Is the attack good enough? They've dropped some points this season when not playing well. They didn't play well against Chelsea, dropped points. They didn't play well against Fulham. They dropped points from a winning position and also had the man advantage. There are a few things that I think need to be answered from Arsenal, and that's why I'm being harsh, and I am fully open to admitting I'm being harsh, and I'm fully open to the possibility that maybe Arsenal should move into the A tier, but for me, I am going to be critical and say that the B tier is where Arsenal belong. Tottenham. Recency bias may suggest that they may deserve lower than this, but I'm going to go with an A tier. No one was expecting Tottenham to have gone so far into the season unbeaten and top of the league. They managed to achieve both of those things. Until before last week on Monday, they were top of the table. They were unbeaten. Everything was going well. And then over the course of the past week, it's been a perfect storm. For all the wrong reasons for Spurs, in terms of losing to Chelsea in the way that they did, losing then to Wolves in the way that they did, and of course suffering all the suspensions and injuries in between. It has been the perfect nightmare, if there is ever such a phrase, for Ange Postecoglou. Away from that, and when you look at the season so far overall as a whole, it's been a brilliant season in terms of Postecoglou's bedding in very well. Some of the new signings bedding in very well. Mickey van der Ven looks a quality signing. James Maddison's arguably been the signing of the season. Both of them obviously missing through injury for the next month, 2 or 3 months at that. So they're going to be major misses for Spurs. But they've bedded in very, very well. They've done very, very well so far. I think Ange has to adapt now. I think it's going to be big question marks over whether Ange is going to adapt to the Premier League, whether he's going to go and try some things different with the squad that he has. Remember, everyone was saying that Tottenham's first 11 looks good. It's the squad depth behind that first 11 where there are massive holes and question marks. And now, with obviously the injuries that Tottenham have, we're going to have to see whether Ange adapts to the side that he has been left with and in the side that he's pretty much adopted since arriving at Spurs, or what he's going to do. If he fails to adapt, Tottenham's season will suffer even more. If he adapts, it obviously could get better for Spurs going forward. So we'll see what obviously happens with Spurs. But yeah, so far so good for Spurs. No one was expecting to get this far in the table. I think it's been a big overachievement so far during this campaign. And if they can obviously see out the rest of the campaign in a top 5 finish and gain Champions League football, that in my opinion will be a massive overachievement to what anybody or the majority of people were thinking could happen to Tottenham Hotspur this season. Aston Villa, A tier. Again, you can maybe argue that maybe the B tier is more suitable for them. I'm going to go with the A tier. I think Unai Emery's done a fantastic job since walking in at Villa Park. I think he's done brilliantly, and I think this season he's only gone on to elevate that level even more. Villa are currently fifth in the table with 8 wins, 1 draw, and 3 losses from their opening 12 games. They are currently on a 13 home game unbeaten run. They are scoring many goals. They're conceding a fair few as well, but mainly their away record needs to be tidied up a little bit. I think if they could tidy up their away form just a little bit, I reckon they could be a real force to be reckoned with. Obviously, Villa are having to contend with Europa Conference League football as well this season, so that should also be factored into their performances. But for me, Unai Emery, 3rd best manager in the Premier League, in my opinion. And for me, I think he's phenomenal. I think he's done a phenomenal job with Aston Villa. And I personally hope it continues. I like seeing what Villa do. I think they've got a very good side. I think they've got some very good players in there, all working very hard. They're well drilled. They know the assignment. I like what Emery and Aston Villa are doing. So I think it's only right that they belong in the A tier right now. But again, I can concede that maybe the B tier could be more suitable. Manchester United are up next, and we're going to put them into the C tier. Now, C or D may be where many people may haggle over this one, and I can understand why. For me, I look at it this way. United have had a very poor start to the season. Hit and miss, inconsistent. Obviously not where they left off last season in a 3rd place finish. They are 6th in the table with 7 wins, 0 draws and 5 losses. So they don't really draw games, to be fair and to give them credit. But they're not as far away as what many people think they may be. If you were to just listen to the out of context stuff that you hear about Manchester United all season, they're poor. There's issues at the club. There's issues with the players, there's issues with the manager, there's issues with the Glazers, the ownership, the structure, the potential takeover, all that stuff. You may be right in thinking that United will be worse off than what they actually are. But them being 6th in the table, 21 points in hand, and with only 4 points behind a 5th place Aston Villa, and a 5 points behind a Tottenham Hotspur side who are currently sat in 4th, and had an unbelievable start to the season, I have to give credit to United and Erik ten Hag for picking up the points that they did, because it sounds like they were a hell of a lot worse off than what they actually are, but they are very, very much in touching distance of a Champions League finish. Obviously, those results have come against teams that you would expect United to beat, with all things considered, but United have been so poor this season that you honestly wouldn't have battered an eyelid if United had lost to the likes of Sheffield United, Burnley, Luton, and so on and so forth. There are big games to come for United over the course of the next month, and it does seem only a matter of time before they do suffer another heavy defeat. Fingers crossed that happens mid-December when Liverpool take on United. But at the same time, I can't drop them any lower than a C. I think they have performed slightly lower than expected, all things considered. And I know that obviously their new signings haven't bedded in well. Their strikers are not hitting the back of the net. They're not firing on all cylinders. And like I say, their record at times can be pretty poor. So there are probably causes for concern and obviously reasons why you could probably move them into the D tier. But with how they are right now and with where they are right now and with the points accumulated, I have to only consider the points factor as to put them in that C tier. Newcastle, again, and they're another team that probably kind of goes on the boundary of C and D. I'm going to be somewhat... If I'm going to be harsh with Arsenal, I've got to be harsh with Newcastle. I'm going to put them in the D tier. I easily could have put them in the C tier. But Newcastle right now, 7th place in the table. 6 wins, 2 draws, 4 losses, 20 points accumulated. A hit and miss, inconsistent start to the season. Obviously having to contend with Champions League action as well, so there's going to be balance and rotation there. It's not been the best start to the season as far as what Newcastle are concerned, and they will be first to admit that. But there are reasons, not excuses, reasons as to why Newcastle's start to the season has been poor. They've had a lot to deal with. They've had plenty of injuries, key injuries, big injuries at that. They've also had the Sandro Tonali issue, which obviously hasn't made things any easier on Eddie Howe. And like I say, they've also had to contend with the Champions League, returning to St James's Park for the first time in around about 20 years. It's not been great from Newcastle, and some of the performances are inexcusable. 2-0 defeat against Bournemouth at the weekend. You could even possibly argue the collapse against the 10-men Liverpool side when the game was there for the taking, when they lost 2-1 to the Reds earlier on in the season. There's no doubt that some of the performances have been inexcusable, but for the most part, there are reasons as to why this Newcastle side have been performing a little bit below expectation. And whilst I see it's harsh that I put them in the D tier, if I'm going to be harsh with Arsenal, I've got to be harsh with everybody as well. And that's why Newcastle are in the D tier for me. But who knows if the injuries dry up soon, if January comes around and there's going to be some kind of money available for Eddie Howe to spend, there is a way for Newcastle to get their season back on track. And it'll be interesting to see what the future holds for their Champions League campaign as well. Do they progress? Do they fall into the Europa League category? It'll be interesting to see what the future holds for Newcastle United going forward. Brighton are up next, and they fall into a similar category with Newcastle. So, I'm going to say C. I'm going to say C for Brighton. Don't have as much money as Newcastle. Have suffered big injuries. 8th in the table. Play some good football. De Zerbi's a good manager. Doesn't change for anybody. They should probably accumulated more points, admittedly, Brighton, but they have made some pretty big individual errors that haven't helped things for them. No win in their last 6 or 7 games. Anywhere across B, C, and maybe D for Brighton, I am prepared to go along with. So I'm just going to call it down the middle and go C. I could have easily gone B for Brighton, easily, with obviously what they've had to contend with, their injuries, things like that, and of course having to also play in the Europa League as well this season. Big injuries have cost them. Individual errors have cost them more. It'll be interesting to see how De Zerbi manages to combat this. Is this signs that maybe the wheels are falling off a little bit at Brighton? I know they haven't had the best of luck in recent times with injuries, with referee decisions, with certain things in certain games. But for me, yeah, C seems pretty fine for the Seagulls. West Ham United are up next. They are in 9th place. They have accumulated 17 points from the opening 12 games. And whilst it was a very good start to the season by David Moyes' side, they, of course, have been very inconsistent in recent games. You could move them into the B tier. Simply for the reason that, they've done better than what they did last season. If you're judging last season, they've done better domestically this season and this time around than they did last season. They've moved up in the table in terms of that aspect. They had a very good start to the season. You could probably move them into B tier, but I think the C tier is pretty safe and sound for them. I think Jared Bowen's been brilliant. I think his goal scoring contributions, or his goal contributions in general, have really been a massive factor in West Ham being where they are right now. I think James Ward-Prowse has been an excellent signing for them. I don't know what more he has to do to get into that England side, but I think maybe a move to a Manchester City, for example, or a Chelsea or an Arsenal or something may, of course, make that actually turn into a reality, because that's just who Southgate is. But I don't know what more he has to do, really, on a footballing level to, of course, break in to that England side. It seems baffling to me. But yeah, West Ham have been pretty solid all season. C tier is where I am putting the Hammers. Chelsea, now this one's a difficult one, because again, you could put them into the D tier, you could put them into the C tier. I am going to go with a C tier finish. C tier. Look, the amount of money that's been spent, you would probably expect Chelsea to be even better than what they are. But there are signs in recent games that Pochettino is getting a hold of this task, and the players are starting to slowly get better. The Tottenham game, obviously, I don't think you can read too much into it. Yes, Chelsea won by 4-1, but there were bizarre circumstances that, of course, contributed to that. Tottenham being down to 9 men, playing a stupidly high line that took Chelsea, admittedly, about half an hour to get to grips and terms with in that aspect. But the game against City was proof that this Chelsea side can do something, and they can be moulded together. Even the Arsenal game for like 70 odd minutes was pretty solid for the most part. The game against Liverpool at the beginning of the season, the final, it was the midway point, the middle of the game, should I say, was very good on Chelsea's part. I just think that this Chelsea side obviously had a lot of issues going into it that were against the manager and the players. Manager coming into a whole new team, the whole new team getting used to the team itself. This whole squad was just thrown together during the summer or in the January for the most part. Brand new squad, brand new system, brand new manager. Everything has to obviously take time to gel, grow together. But you can see little by little, I'm not trying to quote the song there, but little by little, Chelsea are coming together. Chelsea are slowly but surely seemingly getting to grips with the new manager. They still seemingly have that bit of unnervingness about them that makes you worried and doesn't make you entirely confident that they're going to win a more favourable game of football, shall we say. But at the same time, if Jackson can continue scoring, if the likes of Enzo Fernandez, Conor Gallagher can play how they have done in the previous couple of games, if their defence can remain strong and resolute, as they have been for most of this season, if Reece James in particular can stop getting injured after every 3 or 4 games, Chelsea could be on for a very, very good season from the midway point onwards. And it could benefit Chelsea in the long run. But a lot of things have to go in Chelsea's way. There has to be a continuation of the build-up of that trust, of that unity, and of course a continuation of that patience. Because if there's no patience from the board, if there's no patience from the fans, we're just going to be back in square one again with the Blues. So it'll be interesting to see how they progress from here. But I would say a C is probably fair, considering the young, inexperienced squad that Chelsea have. You can move them into the D tier if you want. I'm willing to concede that one as well. But I think C, for the way that they've shown that they can improve, they will improve, and of course they eventually will get better. And it seems that obviously there was a lot going against Chelsea at the beginning of the season with a new manager and an entirely new squad of players that you probably hadn't even heard of, half of them, had to get used to and everything. We'll obviously have to wait and see on that front. Brentford are next. I'm going to move them into the D tier. I'm going to move into the D tier. I'm going to stick with that. My issue with Brentford is not the way that they play football. They play some good football. Thomas Frank's a very good manager. I like Thomas Frank. My issue with them is that they haven't had a consistent enough goal scorer. I think they have lacked that consistent and prolific goal scorer up front. I think they've really missed Ivan Toney. Like I say, they play some good stuff at times, but they just don't seemingly have that prolific goal scorer up front. And plus, they still have this inconsistency about them where they'll go into a game where you probably have them as winning and are probably favourites to win, and they mess it up. Brentford still have that inconsistency factor about them that sees them drop points when really they probably shouldn't be. Again, I think they could have accumulated more if they had an ice-cold finisher up front like Ivan Toney. It will be interesting to see what happens with Ivan Toney's future in January when his ban is lifted. But in saying all of that, Brentford are still there. They're still a strong side. They are still a difficult side to beat. They are still an awkward side to play against. And you would strongly suspect that they will continue to have a finish to the season that will see them in and around about the position that they are. Maybe a little bit higher. I think I had them finishing 10th in my predictions. So I would say they're performing at or just below expectation right now. But of course, that can vastly improve. January may see the selling of Ivan Toney and Brentford using that money that they get from Toney to obviously bring in a more clinical enough striker. Because whilst Mbeumo and Wissa on their day can be very dangerous, and the counter-attacking style of Brentford can be very dangerous to anybody, they just seemingly aren't prolific enough, and it's frustrating because they can be on their day. Wolves are up next, and I'm going to put them in the C tier because Wolves, currently sat in 12th with 4 wins, 3 draws and 5 losses, have really, really impressed me under Gary O'Neill. Obviously, there was a bit of turmoil and a bit of chaos at the beginning of the season when Lopetegui was sacked as manager. They bring in Gary O'Neill right off the bat before a ball is even kicked this season. And obviously, he's had to get to grips and get to terms with the players and the squad right off the bat as quickly as that. And of course, the players had to do the same to him and his management. They spent all summer preparing under one manager. They've had to quickly change under a new manager. And I think it's full credit to Gary O'Neill and full credit to the Wolves squad for doing that. My only issue with Wolves is that they should have more points than they actually have right now. And some of that is down to some dodgy VAR decisions. They've had a fair few dodgy VAR decisions go against them this season. I think they've had 2 in the past couple of weeks, barring that Spurs game. But before that Spurs game, they had a couple of bad decisions in the previous 2 games that have cost them points there. I know the one against Sheffield United was dodgy. I forget the other team that they played the week before. But they had a couple of dodgy VAR calls. They should have had a penalty in the first game against Manchester United as well. That was another dodgy decision that went against Wolves. But ultimately, away from the VAR and referee side of things for Wolves, they cannot score enough goals. Like, I know they've got 16 goals scored this season, but they could have easily had so much more. If they are very good, they're a very good footballing side, but it's just in the final third it lets them down. That final shot, that final pass sometimes just lets them down, and they could have had so many more goals if they had found a clinical and prolific enough goal scorer. Cunha bought in the summer for big money. He needs to step up his game. He looks good. He looks like he's a threat, and he looks like he's a thorn in the side of the opposition. But ultimately, he needs to start scoring more goals. But ultimately, I like what Gary O'Neill's doing. I like what Wolves are going through. And full credit to Gary O'Neill as well. Because having been sacked by Bournemouth in what I think was ruthless and somewhat unfair circumstances by the Cherries at the beginning of the season, I think he's going to get the last laugh over his former club. So, full credit to Gary O'Neill for that. Full credit to Wolves for what they're doing so far this campaign. And hopefully it continues for them. Next up, we've got Crystal Palace, and I'm moving into the C tier. Middle of the road kind of stuff for Palace, really. They've gone a little bit under the radar, which, like I said with Liverpool earlier, can help a club. But ultimately, I think that them going middle of the road is just what they're normally about. Palace normally go under the radar. They'll survive, and they'll be pretty comfortable in surviving from relegation. But ultimately, they're not going to be pulling up any trees. I know they have had some big injuries to some key players, and I get that. But they do drop points when, again, similar to Brentford, they do drop points when you probably would back them to win, and they do pick up some key points here and there when you probably wouldn't expect them to do so at all. So, middle of the road kind of stuff. Roy Hodgson's return has obviously been an interesting one. I don't know where Palace go from this point forward, to be honest. I don't know if he sees out the rest of the season. I don't know if they replace him at the end of the season or who they replace him with, but obviously time will tell on that one. A middle of the road kind of finish and a middle of the road kind of grading for Crystal Palace. Everton, C or D. I'm going to sit them in the C tier again. They've done better than what they have done last season. They are going to stay up this season, Everton, unless they get a big point deduction, and then it could be a bit and ahhing. But they have picked up some big points this season when you probably wouldn't expect them to. Sean Dyche seems to be getting to grips with this Everton side. This Everton side seems to be proving to be pretty difficult to break down at times and proving to be difficult for certain teams as well. So they're definitely picking and choosing their games to perform in. But yeah, Everton picked up some points. I don't want to see Everton obviously do well, but at the same time, inconsistency is the name of the game for the Toffees, and hopefully it's onwards and upwards for them from here. They need to keep Calvert-Lewin fit, of course. They need to start scoring more goals. But I think they'll probably stay up this season, and they are probably about where everybody would expect them to be. Nottingham Forest are again another side that probably many people would probably expect them to be. C or D again. I'm going to go with C because I expect them to be here at this point. Their home form is still okay. Their away form is still hit and miss. Picked up some very good victories in games that you wouldn't predict this season. Against the likes of Chelsea and Aston Villa, those were big wins for Nottingham Forest and for Steve Cooper. But again, inconsistency is the name of the game as far as what Forest are concerned. I like some of their players that they've got. I think they fit in really well with what Steve Cooper's trying to do at the club. And I think they really fit in with Forest as a whole. Obviously, Awunye, that's going to be big for him to stay fit. The likes of Anthony Elanga, he seems to have started off his Nottingham Forest career really well. A few others as well look pretty solid. I know they've made changes to the back line as well, which are starting to take shape. So we intend to see how Forest develop from here. But so far, so good for Forest. Again, I think they'll stay up because I think there are three worse teams at the very least. Worse than Forest. But at the same time, yeah, it's going to be another solid season for Forest in terms of staying up and achieving that particular goal. Fulham, E. I'm going to have to say E because it's not been a complete failure, but because it's kind of what I expected. But I guess in the overall consensus of things, I think many people expected them to do better than what they actually did. For me, Fulham were always going to find it difficult to replace the goal scoring and physical attributes of Alexander Mitrovic, and Raul Jimenez just isn't that fit. If this was the Raul Jimenez of several years ago, before he of course had his horrific head injury, I would be sat here probably suggesting that you could be right. Like, it's entirely possible that he could definitely fill those kinds of shoes. However, not to be. It's not to be. Jimenez doesn't score enough goals. He's not consistent enough, and that's where Fulham's downfall kind of spirals from. Not scoring enough goals. They're not as big of a threat or an awkward side as they were last season. They're not obviously enjoying the season as much as what they were last time out in the last campaign. Goals are hard to come by. One of the worst goal scoring records in the Premier Division so far. They're conceding far too many. Their home form isn't as dangerous as what it was last season. It's just not the same for Fulham anymore, and they've gone a little bit under the radar in my opinion because I think other teams have sort of taken the limelight. But at the same time, they are certainly a team that, in my opinion, have underperformed, underwhelmed, and again, they will survive because I think there are three worse teams off than Fulham, but they need to be very, very careful that their goal scoring record doesn't dry up even more, because if it does, then they could be in some serious trouble going forward in this campaign. Bournemouth, I'm going to say E again for Bournemouth. And again, I could move them into the D tier, and I get that. I'm going to say E for Bournemouth, simply for the reason that I don't like the way that they got rid of Gary O'Neill at the end of last season. I think that was wrong, and that was poor decision making of them, and I think that he will have the last laugh, as he's seemingly doing right now. I don't like the way they got rid of him. I like the way this new manager plays, though. I'll be open and balanced. I like the way the new manager plays. He plays some good stuff at times. My issue with Bournemouth is that they concede too many and they don't score enough. They play some good stuff and then they mess up chances. I've seen them against Liverpool. I've seen them against the likes of Liverpool and Tottenham. They play some good stuff in those games. They just didn't have a goal scorer. And I know they picked up a couple of big wins. One against Burnley, relegation rivals, relegation candidates. And I know they picked up a big win this past weekend against Newcastle in what was somewhat fortunate circumstances for Bournemouth to be playing them at that time with the amount of injuries that they have. Again, it's not a critique and I'm not being harsh on them at all in any way, shape or form. I'm just saying that if you were to choose a time to play Newcastle, you would have probably picked this past weekend with all of the injuries that they had. I still think Newcastle probably had enough to beat them on the day, and full credit goes to Bournemouth for obviously putting in that kind of level of performance. But at the same time, they were there for the taking. Bournemouth, I predict them to go down at the beginning of the season. I stand by that claim that they will go down at the beginning of the season. And we shall obviously see what happens going forward. But for me, they need to start scoring more goals, getting more points on the board if they want to try and maintain their Premier League status. Luton Town. I'm going to say... I'm going to say D for Luton Town. I could go C. D. And the reason it's that high is because I don't think anybody predicted Luton to get as many points as what they did. I don't think Luton were backed by many as to maintaining their Premier League status this season. I don't think many people are expecting Luton Town to do anything this season other than return to the Championship. However, they have picked up 6 points so far from their opening 12 games. They're on course to steer clear of Derby County's lowest points tally record for a single Premier League season. I think they will achieve over 11 or 12 points, is it, for Derby County's lowest points tally in by any Premier League side. So I think they'll stay clear of that. I think they will achieve that particular goal. But otherwise, again, they're going to have to make Kenilworth Road an absolute fortress. They picked up a good couple of results from there. They actually drew to Liverpool, of course, a couple of weeks ago at home. So if they are going to try and survive this season, they're going to have to turn Kenilworth Road into a massive fortress for them. And it can be done. It certainly can be done. Whether or not it actually happens or not remains to be seen. They need to start scoring more goals. They need to start putting away some of their chances. But yeah, I would say that they've overachieved in the fact that they've actually picked up more points than what many people were probably predicting. So it may seem a bit dumb to put them as high as what it is, but I'm actually going to go with that particular logic. Sheffield United, I'm going to go with a D, Sheffield United. I think they came into this Premier League season with all kinds of chaos, stuff going on behind the scenes, everything along those lines occurring for Sheffield United. That wasn't obviously great for the club in obviously returning to the Premier League for the first time in a few years. But they managed to achieve it. They got their first win under their belts a couple of weeks ago, albeit in rather controversial circumstances. But when you're at the bottom of the table, you take it however it comes. And for me, I see Sheffield United. I've not watched them a great deal this season. I've watched them a fair few times. I think in recent games, what you're starting to see is this side begin to gel a little bit more. They're starting to come to terms with the Premier League a little bit more. They're starting to give it a real good go. They just don't have the quality to obviously see out games. They don't have the quality that other teams do to get them across the finish line. They'll go down, but it won't be for a lack of trying. It won't be for a lack of effort by Sheffield United, and that's where I give them praise for. And I think that the manager, if they stick by the manager, it could possibly be a yo-yo thing for them, in which they go down to only come back up again the following season. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Sheffield United going forward, but I think they've put up more of a fight than what many people would have expected. And Burnley go into the F tier because they have been extremely shocking in my opinion. I don't think they've been that great. I put them to finish higher than they currently are. I put them to finish about mid-table, I think. because I thought Vincent Kompany was going to adapt to the Premier League, and I thought he was going to help his Burnley side adapt to the Premier League, and they haven't. They simply haven't adapted. They're playing their Premier League style in the way that they played in the Championship, and you can't do that. You need to have some adaptability and some flexibility that Kompany isn't showing. Don't get me wrong, they play some good football at times, but they just don't have anybody prolific enough to finish off a chance. And they also don't have the defensive capabilities to play such a high risk, high reward sort of style, whilst also keeping the ball from reaching the back of their own net. So, for me, they're open and shut case. Kompany needs to change things as soon as possible. They've got some massive games coming up at Burnley. Every game is increased pressure. Every game is going to be intense now from now until particularly January, before we get to see what obviously teams do to their sides in the transfer window. But ultimately, Kompany needs to change things. Otherwise, he could be on the chopping block, and Burnley could be obviously going back down to the Championship. I like what he's done with the club. I like the change that he's made at the club. I like the change in philosophy, the drastic changes to philosophy in the club, and the way that everything is run at that club now, since obviously what we've previously known about the club known as Burnley from the Sean Dyche era. But at the same time, Burnley, for me, are in trouble. And Vincent Kompany needs to change things, and he needs to adapt his way of playing as soon as possible. But as I always say, these are just the thoughts, comments, opinions, predictions, feelings, whatever you want to call it, of this guy. I don't know what you guys think. What do you make of this tier list? Am I right? Am I wrong? Tell me about your thoughts, comments, opinions, predictions, feelings, whatever you want to call it, in regards to the Premier League, the start of the season, the tier list, and everything else in between in the comment section, because I'm sure it'll make for interesting and great reading. Otherwise, hit the like button on the way. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you're new and want to see more content like this. Both things always be greatly appreciated. And of course, thank you all so much for watching and listening. I've been Fletch. This has been another Fletch Talks video, and I'll see you all again soon in another video or live stream or whatever it may be. Cheers, guys. Thanks all so much for watching and listening. Talk to you again soon. Take care.